The following program, The Lightning Strike, is sponsored by Mohammed Fahim, and to the extent applicable, their guests. The views and opinions expressed therein do not necessarily reflect those of NewsWeb Radio Company or its management.
Get ready to be jolted out of the ordinary and into a world where conversations are charged with intensity and facts. The Lightning Strike Talk Radio with your host, Mohammed Fahim, broadcasting live from the heart of the city on Chicago's Progressive Talk Radio, WCPT 820 AM. Welcome to a radio show that charges through the airwaves with an electricity like no other. Here's your host, Mohammed Fahim.
In the studios today, Sheila White.
Good morning.
And Maria Muzaffar.
Good morning.
Ken DeLuc would be joining us online.
Howdy.
Hey, Ken. And John Arena is actually not going to be in the studio with us or on the air today, and I hope that he could call in and we could take him on. We got a very packed schedule for the show today, folks. We have got 3 guests coming on. Our first guest is going to be Mr. Haroon Siddiqui. I'll introduce him in just a minute. Then we have Jesse Jackson Jr. joining us at about 9:20, and at about 9:40 we have Chuck Krugel, who is a prominent employment law attorney in Chicago, joining us to discuss all this crazy stuff that is happening with all the firings that Doge and Trump is doing and the legality of those things. So we will be having a lot of people on the show today. And on that note, I want to bring in my first guest, Mr. Haroon Siddiqui, who is the editorial page editor emeritus at the Toronto Star and a senior fellow at the Massey College at the University of Toronto. And long before Mehdi Hasan, Hasan Minhaj, or Bassem Yousef, there were renowned Muslim Canadian journalist Haroon Siddiqui, reporting for 50 years from 50 countries and at the helm of Canada's largest newspaper, the Toronto Star, for 38 of those. He has long championed diverse stories and pluralism, and he is also a recipient of the Order of Canada for his journalism, the highest award given to a civilian. Siddiqui's work has also appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, and The Globe, and The Mail, and we are very, very, very happy to welcome Mr. Haroon Siddiqui. Good morning.
Good morning to you, sir. How are you?
Thank you so much for joining us. If you can speak up a little bit, and if you've got your radio on, if you're listening, just listen on the phone so it doesn't give any feedback to us. And thank you so much for joining us. So you started off with writing a book called Being Muslim, and now the most recent memoir that you have, My Name Is Not Harry. I read some of the excerpts of that phenomenal book. Can you walk us through what made you write that book?
What made me write that book was I initially started writing about how Canada has changed for the better in the last 50 years that I've been here. But my publisher suggested that I write also about my origins in India. And the way she explained it was that we all bring complicated histories to Canada and to the United States. That's what enriches our national narrative, and that is how I wrote about India and then about Canada, and how Canada and the Western world has evolved for the better. That's one. And as the name suggests, it's really a mischievous title, which is a way of saying one ought to feel proud of one's identity, about one's name. One need not change one's name. Be proud of who you are, and that is the great promise of democracy, and that's how we all feel equal and we extend equal dignity to each other.
I was reading something that Canada has no official culture. It follows that there's no standard way of being a Canadian, right? Beyond obeying the law,
Yes.
that's what you say. So let me ask you a little bit about the difference between Canada and what we are trying to do over here in America now as far as the DEI is concerned. But coming from India in 1967, that was a long time back. What made you come from India to Canada?
Oh, that's another separate story. The Canadian High Commissioner in India, whom I had run into at a meeting, and he said, well, young men like you should go to Canada. And in my youthful arrogance, I had said, why would anyone want to go to Canada? It's so bloody cold there, isn't it? But I ended up coming, and I ended up staying, and I'm happy that I did. As per your question, The two major differences that have been talked about always between the United States and Canada, both are democracies, of course. One is an assimilationist model, which is the United States. Be American, speak like American, behave like American, do in Rome as the Romans do. Canada has taken a different approach, which is an integrationist approach. And our Prime Minister in the 1970s, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the father of the current Prime Minister, had famously got up in Parliament and said Canada has no official culture. All citizens are equal. There is no one single way of being a Canadian. So be Canadian in a million ways that you want to be, so long as you obey the law. What that does is provides room for people to grow, not be on the defensive by majoritarian mores. There is no one way of being Canadian, and that lets people thrive and feel their dignity, and the larger society is the better for it.
Well, I've got Maria and Sheila also in the studio with me today, and Ken is also joining us on the phone. You guys want to ask any questions for Mr. Siddiqui? I mean, such a fascinating personality that we have today.
Yeah, no, this is Maria. Thank you, Mr. Siddiqui, for joining us. I was actually motivated to kind of go back to some of the first few days that you landed in Canada, and I know that you made a distinction between the way the United States addresses diversity and the way that Canada does. Did you feel what was the overall attitude in privately and publicly? So public-facing institutions or agencies, and when they were communicating with you in your first year in Canada, and your private engagements that made you feel like diversity is very encouraged in Canada?
No, one of the first shocks in Canada was that there was no yogurt available. You know, yogurt is a basic staple for Indians, food, especially South Indians. In fact, no proper rice, no proper vegetables, no yogurt, no cumin, no cardamom. So the whole range of spices that we Indians are used to were missing. And I phoned my mother and said, none of these things is available here. So my mother said, son, you better come back home in that case. What kind of country have you gone to? But 50, 60 years later, Canada and even the United States are the cuisine capitals of the world. So that's one big change that has happened. And it has happened because of immigration. It has happened because we have opened our doors to peoples of all cultures, and we have welcomed them. And this is more or less true of the United States as well. In terms of institutions and so on, at that time, most of the new immigrants who had come in were still exotic, were welcome, were a curiosity. It is only when the numbers got higher into the 70s and so on that overt discrimination started appearing, which is at what time Canada brought in what we call the official policy of official multiculturalism, which extends equal dignity to all the people. And that has made a big difference. But now, 50 years later, we are facing a backlash, what has been called as white lash, especially in the United States and across Europe. What is the major fault line of the Western countries these days? It is the color line. We don't want Mexicans and we don't want South Americans and so on who are not white to come to the United States, certainly not pouring into our borders. Same thing across Europe. Of course, by way of distinction, we say legal and illegal, but the xenophobia that is now spreading the Western countries is really white people asserting their majoritarian authority, saying we don't really want to be multicultural. We don't want everyone to be equal. I mean, Mr. Trump is a perfect example of it. Canada still has...
Sorry to just jump in over here. Let us take a quick break and continue the conversation after the break, okay?
Yes, please.
Welcome back to the Lightning Strike with Mohammed Fahim.
Good morning, folks. And we have Maria Muzaffar, and Ken is joining us on the phone. John is not on the show today. We've got Mr. Haroon Siddiqui. We've got about 3 minutes to wind up our segment with Mr. Siddiqui. So thank you so much for staying on the phone with us. I think Maria has got a question for you.
Well,
Yes,
no,
please.
I was going to say, it seems like you are a pioneer for a lot of the political commentators and journalists that are speaking on the issues that you were speaking about. What is your opinion on the narrative and the angle that people like Mehdi Hasan and other people are, and how they are broaching the topic? And is there more of a audience there when there was at your time when you were writing such compelling pieces?
No, you see, there are two ways of looking at it. The United States is a big enough market and a big enough economy that there is room for all sorts of points of view. There is Fox News on the right, there is somebody else on the left, and each of them finds enough of a niche in America. Market is being so big. That is not generally possible in Canada, and that is rarely possible in the smaller European countries and so on. So the more voices, the better. America is a rambunctious kind of democracy where all points of view prevail. Everyone is shouting in the marketplace. The danger now is that in the United States, we have half the population not talking to the other half of the population. That is the biggest danger at this point. Because we can have democracy, we can have differences of opinion, we have adversaries, not enemies of each other. But that is what is happening in the United States, and friends of the United States like Canada, the great neighbor to the north, that is what we worry about most, about the United States at this point. This rambunctiousness, this dialogue, this shouting and so on and so forth, has it crossed the point where people are not listening to each other. And part of it is the social media, because social media gave us a promise of greater freedom for individuals, a greater public square, true in the beginning. But now, that very institution, social media, has allowed each one of us to retreat into our own silos. I want to listen to only those who agree.
I have a quick question, too.
Ken, we are running out of time on the segment over here, Ken. So if you don't mind holding your question for Jesse Jackson. And Mr. Siddiqui is joining us all the way from Canada, folks. And your book now, My Name is Not Harry, is running pretty strong on Amazon. I saw 8 reviews of it. All of them are saying it's an excellent book. And is there any other place that people can get the book now that you have just released it?
It will soon be available in bookstores, ideally very quickly, and certainly is available on Amazon. And the only point to be made is it's written in Canada, but Americans and Europeans will find it useful because it responds to the common theme of how a multicultural, diverse society live with each other. How can we advance the common cause of our democracies together as opposed to tearing each other apart? That is the central message of this book.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Siddiqui, for joining us. And folks, you are tuned in to The Lightning Strike. I'm your host, Mohammed Fahim. With me in the studio, Sheila White, Maria Muzaffar, Ken DeLuke is on the phone with us today. And we have got Jesse Jackson Jr. joining us, and I'd love to welcome him to the Lightning Strike. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us.
Mohammed, it's my honor. Hi, Sheila. Hi, Kendall.